community concerns. I'm your host, Hasan. My guest this evening, my friend and mentor, Grady Abrams. We'll be discussing a couple of issues this evening, one being the comments made by Reverend Jesse Jackson in reference to Senator Obama, another issue being an opinion editorial in the Augusta Chronicle on July the 20th titled, Go Against the Tide to Change the Justice System by Grady Abrams. Grady, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ben. Glad to be here.
Grady, we're talking about this opinion editorial. Why did you decide to write the editorial?
Well, Ben, basically the cost involved in incarcerating people who have committed not violent crimes but nonviolent crimes. I read somewhere where it costs about $30,000 a year to incarcerate a person, and I thought that this was an enormous cost to the taxpayers. And sometimes we don't question this cost because we don't know about it and it's not brought to our attention. So I wanted to bring this to the attention of the public that there's an enormous cost in incarcerating people who are not violent, but who otherwise could perhaps pay their fine, pay the cost of their crime outside of a prison system or in a prison where they can get some release to go out and do work that will not only pay for the crime that they committed, but also pay for their room and board in prison. I think the cost needs to be borne by the person who commits the crime and not the taxpayers.
Okay, but also very interesting, most time when you write letters to the editor, opinion editorials, you always tell a story. Why is that always important when you write your article?
Well, before I get into the meat of the article, I want to kind of soften things and allow people to understand where I'm coming from when I get to the article. So it's just an introduction into the article.
Okay. So the article here, as I begin to look at some of the bloggers on the Chronicle in reference to it, some of them were on point, but quite a few was making reference to assuming that you were more so concerned about who was being institutionalized as opposed to the taxpayers. And to me, you was focusing more on the cost that the taxpayers is bearing as a result of people being incarcerated.
Right.
You know, more than they. But what was your real point? So that's my perspective on it. What is your true point here?
Well, that was my point. I wasn't trying to put any particular group out front as being more incarcerated than another group. That wasn't the issue in this article. The whole issue was cost. Just think, Ben, $30,000 a year to incarcerate a person who has perhaps committed a nonviolent crime. The other thing is that what do we get for incarcerating people of this ilk? We get a person who goes into the prison system, perhaps maybe the first time, but by the time he gets out or she gets out, that person is not going to be a better person except for some thing that happened. Some people said they found the Lord while they were in prison, but not many people find the Lord in prison. That's just a minuscule number of people that do so. What happens to the rest of the people? Many of them become worse after going into prison, and coming out, they are worse people than they were when they went in. So in a way, what we are doing, the victim has paid for the crime by being victimized, and then we turn around as taxpayers and pay for the crime again by housing these people and having them sit into a prison cell, perhaps watch TV, go out on the recreation grounds and do recreational work. But other than that, they are not productive. So we are paying the cost of them to be non-productive, and at the same time paying the cost for them to come out to be worse criminals than they were when they went in.
But you also made a point in this article here that many times that these laws that are drafted by our legislators, whether they're on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level, many times those laws are drafted out of emotion. There'll be some kind of tragedy that will happen, whether it's a rape, whether it's a murder, whether it's a bank robbery, and people be killed or what have you. And as a result of that, legislators immediately begin to try to draft legislation out of emotions And you said, so that's why most of the time this community begin to bear the burden of this because these laws are drafted simply out of emotions.
Yes, yes. It's a bad time to write any kind of legislation when you're doing it from an emotional point of view, from an emotional standpoint. Laws should be written rationally. We should take plenty of time to think about them, but I understand the plight of politicians. If someone's child has been murdered, been raped, and you are being requested to go to the State House, to Congress and write some legislation, you're not going to be resistant to the request of those people because these are voters who put you in office, and nobody wants to resist writing legislation that's going to help victims. And I'm not against legislation that is written to help victims. What I'm saying is that when we write legislation, let's do it in a more rational way. When we started the war in Iraq, we started that and supported that war because we were emotional about what happened at 9/11. So it was easy for the president to sell us on going to Iraq and fighting the war there. Now we are realizing just how much that war cost us in terms of lives and money, and we are rethinking what we had done several years earlier. Same thing applies to writing legislation for crime. We need to really sit down and think about it, try as much as we can to eliminate the emotional aspect of the crime, and say what is best not only for the victims but also for the taxpayers. And sometimes I don't think we include the taxpayers, especially the cost to the taxpayers when we are writing legislation.
But also to compound that fact about people who know emotional laws being written, there's a certain element across the nation that don't believe in such thing as a person being able to rehabilitate. They believe in strictly impunity.
Yes.
And then we also paying a serious cost once again because you gave an example in there saying about if you incarcerated 100 people at around $30,000 a year, you're talking about serious monies here.
Sure, serious money.
And you said with this money you can take and be a library, school, and what have you, just on 100 people alone. So just be mindful of how many hundreds and thousands of people that are incarcerated across this, that the taxpayers are bearing the burden of it, and those people eventually has to come back to society.
Yes, I call it the justice industrial complex, meaning that everybody is making money off of crime. Lawyers, courts, probation officers, there's an industry, a crime industry, and there are some people who really don't want crime to decrease because that means jobs will decrease. Find other ways of dealing with crime other than housing them in the prison system. That will cut out a lot of jobs. And there's a resistance to that kind of thinking. But we have got to start thinking in terms of what can we pay for and what can't we pay for.
So you do believe, and I think if we would say go across the board, and I wanted to do some state numbers, and I really didn't get a chance to call out correction institution on the state level to try to see what is the average time frame that people are incarcerated in the state of Georgia. But I feel confident saying between, I say 7 to 10 years. Let's go in the high end of 10 years. So what your real goal is saying to the taxpayers, listen, why don't we create a system pretty much whereas people can be rehabilitated while they're incarcerated, because eventually those people are going to come back to society. Is that your point? One of your points?
Yes, that's one of the points. We don't want people to come out worse than they were when they went in. And if there's no rehabilitation going on, and some people resist rehabilitation. I've heard people say, we don't want them rehabilitated. We want them to be punished. And I don't think they really know what they're saying, because if you treat a person like an animal while you have him or her incarcerated, that person is going to come out being an animal and do more harm to society than initially was done. We have got to move into the arena of rehabilitation. No matter how angry we are with the person who's committed the crime, that's where we have to get back to rational thinking. what is the best thing for society, for the taxpayer, in the end? Is it making this person more humane, or is it rehabilitated? We have a choice. It's a clear-cut choice: rehabilitation or punishment. If you rehabilitate, you have a chance of that individual coming out, maybe being productive in society. If you punish him the whole while he's in prison, and you look at his imprisonment as punishment, you're going to have a person that's coming out who's not going to be able to fit well in society, and probably end up back in prison and adding more cost to the taxpayer.
So the taxpayer has to realize that they're paying on both ends.
They're paying on both ends. They get the short end of the stick.
They get the short end of the stick, and that's your point, because what happens here is that people come back into society. The taxpayers in the community is at risk all over again.
Yes, it's all over again, and it's more risk because these people learn things while in prison. They learn how to be better criminals, learn how to evade the law better, and so the chances of them being caught as they were when they initially committed crime is going to be less because they have learned how to evade the law, and that means that they'll be able to commit more crimes and get away with it, and before they are eventually caught and locked up again.
Okay, great. Okay.
So both the society, the taxpayers and society continues to pay for our lack of rationalization when it comes to imprisoning people.
Okay. Before we move on, is there anything you want to say about that? Because next I want to go ask some, about some comments that Reverend Jackson made into Senator Obama. So is there anything else you'd like to say about your letter to the editor before we move on?
Yeah, I mentioned Cliff Hirschberg, who was a manager of mine back in 1965 at Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. I started working at Metropolitan in 1965 as an agent at 13th and Green streets, and then we finally moved to the Georgia Railroad Bank building, which is now the Wachovia building. We were able to bring in a lot of recruits into the insurance industry during those years. The one thing I mentioned in the article that Mr. Hirschberg tried to teach me was that when you're trying to get some people to do something who are not interested in it and can't afford it, you are urinating against the tide. He didn't use that word urinate. He said a more cruel word. But I listened to him, and evidently I didn't learn anything because I've been doing that against the tide for as long as I can remember. It's just a natural thing in me to question things and look at the improbable, the impossible, and try to make those things work.
So how does that fit in terms of, because that's how you introduced this article here, so how does this fit into the article in terms of introducing him here? Do you think by you trying to get the citizens or the taxpayers to think about the situation here with the incarceration perspective, do you think that is going against the grain, per se, going against the wind, and saying that, or do you think that people are actually seriously take a look at what you're saying here?
Absolutely. I think it is going against the grain because most of us would love to lock them up and throw away the key. Out of sight, out of mind. But they may be out of sight and they may be out of mind, but they are not out of our pocketbook. We still have to pay for it, and that's the point I was trying to make. It doesn't go away because you don't see them and you don't hear them. They are still costing you as a taxpayer to be incarcerated. That was the whole point.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move on to some of the comments that Reverend Jackson made in terms of Senator Obama. First, I'd like the audience to know that we are not taking Reverend Jackson to task. That's not my intent here. Reverend Jackson has apologized to Senator Obama, and to his family for the community, to the nation as a whole for the comments that he made. So we're not focused on why he did what he did and trying to say he wasn't right, he wasn't this. That's not the point here. The point is that in terms of him making the comments here, do you find the comments in terms of something that you wouldn't expect based on the dynamics of the era here? The transformation from the likes of the Reverend Jesse Jackson to Senator Obama. There's a generation gap here going on in terms of what's happening here, and you think he initiated that comment. This is actually your opinion on this.
Perhaps there is a gap of the old school and the new school. I think Barack has brought to the stage a new kind of politics, not predicated on race, not predicated on any particular group of people, but people in general.
Do me a favor, please.
Yes.
Before we get into that, I'm gonna need to make a commercial break, and we're gonna come right back and we're gonna continue that dialogue. We'll be right back. We're gonna take a commercial break.
Do you need your computer repaired or your office network maintained? Call the certified experts at 4T's Computers. They have the largest staff of certified technicians in the CSRA, with hundreds of computers repaired monthly and multiple maintenance contracts with small businesses and organizations. All work is guaranteed, and our motto is, do it right the first time. We have the largest selection of refurbished computers in the area. 4T's has 2 locations to serve you, 592 on Expressway across from Home Depot, and Windsor Plaza next to the post office on Peach Orchard Road.
It's the perfect way to get your morning going on 96.3 Kiss FM with Fats and Cher.
And I've got your Kiss and Tell Entertainment. He's got your classic throwbacks, so much more. Set your clock and join us weekday morning, 6 to 10, only on 96.3 Kiss FM or on your computer at 96kissfm.com.
For quick and friendly service, come to Quickway Florists. Call our professional staff to inquire about beautiful fresh cut arrangements, seasonal bouquets, centerpieces, and more. Let us help customize your funeral designs. Or stop by and purchase one of our pre-arranged bouquets. For all of your floral needs, call Quickway Florists, flowers for all occasions. Located at 1335 Druid Park Avenue in Augusta. Quickway Florists.
I'm Sister King Cannon, and I encourage you to tune in every Monday through Friday on Praise 96.9, where we bring you inspirational praise 24 hours a day. That's Monday through Friday from 2 to 6. We'll bring you the update on what's happening in church, in our community, and current events on what's happening right here within the CSRA. Remember, that's Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 on Praise 96.9 with yours truly, Sister King Cannon.
Welcome back. You're watching Comcast Community Concerns. Your host, Ben Hasan. My guest, once again, is Grady Abrams, my friend and mentor. Grady, before we went to commercial break, I was making mention of that we was going to be discussing here in this segment some comments that Reverend Jackson made in terms of Senator Obama. We let it be known once again that he had apologized. So we're just talking about the nature of the comments out of context in terms of there's a generational gap here. We're living in a new day and time here versus Reverend Jackson. Do you think that was what caused the comments that Reverend Jackson made?
Yeah, I think there is a gap from the old school to the new school. As I said, Obama is practicing a new type of politics that we've not seen or heard of in this country before, especially coming from a black man. I can understand how Reverend Jackson would have some issues with it. He's been out there for 40, 50 years on the front line. And all of a sudden, here comes somebody with a different way of doing things, and he's virtually excluded from the debate, from the conversation. And but you know, we got to take this in context, Ben. Those comments that Reverend Jackson made were made with a hot mic. I would hazard to guess that with any of us, if the mic were on us and unaware, is that some of the things that we would say and are saying, people would hold us to be some kind of inhibitor of progress. We would say, well, looks like everybody is angry with Obama. Because I know from time to time, many of us said some negative things about Obama, things that he's saying, things that he is doing that we don't agree with. In this case, it just happens that the mic was on Reverend Jackson, and I don't hold him for that because he wasn't saying it in a public forum. He was saying it privately, and evidently the person he was talking to understood it because he didn't resist the conversation at all. We all make comments when we feel that we can make them whether in private conversation or whether we are talking to ourselves.
So let me ask you this then. So let's not talk, okay, granted, accept all that you said there, but let's look at it from perspective. Let's look at what was said in terms of personal responsibility, because his comments seem to stem, you know, I think there's a bigger issue, seem to stem from the Father's Day speech that Senator Barack had made into a church about personal responsibility. Why would that personal responsibility draw that type of response?
Well, Ben, it even draws that kind of response from your program. Things that we've talked about, it's not popular in the community.
Some of those things, excuse me, some of those things have been, we've defined Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tom, and apologizing when you're wrong.
Power forgiveness.
Power forgiveness.
Had Jerry Smith to talk about it's time to stop blaming the white man.
Yes, yes.
Those kinds of things, but go ahead.
Those things are resistant in our community. So we're not going to be popular bringing these issues and these subjects up. We want to keep people sort of dependent, and that gives us control over them.
We who now? When you say we,
those who are in leadership positions,
okay.
Want to keep people dependent on them. Don't want them to think for themselves. I find that to be very prevalent in this community. Is derided in this community. We are not put up as people who are to be listened to. People will go out of their way to keep people from listening to these kinds of conversations. Control factor is involved here. You control people when you can control what they can hear and what they should hear. And as I said, it's very prevalent in this community.
So now are we witnessing something here in terms of Senator Obama, the comments that Reverend Jackson made about Senator Obama? He has apologized. Senator Obama's message has not only, he made it on the Father's Day, he has went before the NAACP and reinforced it. It seems to be being accepted now. So are we entering into a new era now for the things that we have talked about here for the last couple of years, not just on this program, but even we were on the radio? Are those now becoming of age now that our community and the community at large is ready to hear those things? Do you think that is happening?
To some extent, but I think we have a long way to go. There are people who are jumping on the bandwagon because it's popular to do so. But the real deal is going to come when, if Obama is elected president, we're going to find that he's not going to be able to do the things that we are hoping that he will do. And that is continue programs, help programs, and doing a lot of domestic things for people. I think it's a heads up that he's given us about individual responsibility. And I think it would do well if we start practicing that now, because to think that when Obama becomes president, that Obama is going to relieve us of our responsibility. That's not going to be the case. In fact, I think he is going to demand more of us than any president in history, because Obama knows the importance of getting us to accept individual responsibility for our actions. Only then can we grow as a people and contribute to this country once we get out of that dependency mode and get into an independent mode.
So let me move away from that. Well, not move away from it, but does that, just over the weekend I saw a special Reclaiming the Dream, and we saw the likes of Bishop T.D. Jakes, Ed Gordon, Dr. Cornel West, and others was talking and applauding personal responsibility. So when you look at a CNN, we look at an Essence magazine, is that why now they're taking the lead and trying to invest in this conversation about personal responsibility, so that in the event of that Senator Obama becomes president, we won't be the biggest burden to him that he's ever seen, and at the same time knowing that it's time that we have this public conversation?
I think they've been dragged into taking this side, that is the individual responsibility, because how can you stay outside of not taking the position of individual responsibility? Because that's where it all starts, with the individual, not with the group, but with the individual. The group is made up of individuals, so groups don't do anything. It's individuals that do things, and as many of those individuals in the group that we can get the message to that you will need to start assuming individual responsibility for your actions. So I heard this morning on the radio Marilyn Joyce talking about the prison system and how prisoners are being, those who are released told that they can't vote once they get out of prison and have served their time and paid the fines and paid all the fees that's necessary to be paid. And they're being told still that they can't vote. And, but, you know, even at that, when people are telling you bad information, it's your responsibility to do research to find good information, not just stop at what someone tells you without doing your research yourself. And she gave a very good example about one of her relatives buying a car, and the car was no good the first day, and she was wondering why he didn't do something about it. And she was told that the man said that I can't bring the car back and they can't do anything about it. He didn't do further research, and she had taken him to the internet that had 200 or 300 different places that he could have found the truth, only if he had gone and looked for it. And that's where we got to get people.
Well, let's then. And it was interesting because just yesterday as well in Augusta Chronicle, they was doing having a conversation with Dr. Betty, the school superintendent, and one of the questions, what has been your biggest challenge? He said, attitude. He said, I don't think anybody could have gotten me to understand what a challenge it would be to have people think positively about education. I'm surprised at the number of people who are negative about Richmond County schools and partly negative about inaccurate information that don't even seem to be interested in finding the factual information before they are quick to judge and who are holding on to the past. Now we know his comments are directly talking about the school system and what he's being introduced to and what he's come away with as a result of being engaged into that process in the school system. But we both know that's a mindset of our overall community.
Sure,
you
absolutely. Know? Been in the last 3 years, what this community has gotten by radio talk shows is practically mostly negative information, not good information, not researched information, and many people have believed what they have heard and they've acted on it. Now they got to go back and revamp and rethink what they thought they knew. And I hear some of them on radio now seem to be changing their views on things, but it was reinforced every day on the radio, every morning, negative things. It's going to take a while to get people out of that mode and getting them on the avenue of receiving good information.
So when you hear them talking now, moving away from, because like I say, I think we've been talking about this for quite some time, from radio to here on this program here, about personal responsibility. How optimistic are you that this is going to catch on? We got about a minute and a half here.
Well, I'm optimistic that it's going to catch on at a time frame. I'm not optimistic that it's going to happen overnight, next week or next month or next year. It's going to take a while to deprogram people the way they've been thinking and attitudes that they have. Sad thing, some people don't have that kind of time, and they may not be on the scene when that change does take place. But I think it's moving in the right direction, and we just need to reinforce it.
Okay, and I think that's what you do in all that you do. And once again, we thank you for the article that you wrote to the Augusta Chronicle. I think it's always insightful. I think the taxpayer should look at that, paying $30,000 a year and not getting anything after 5 years. A person, you got $150,000 tied up in an individual, and they're a worse criminal once they come back to society.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, yeah, you got them 5 years, give them the 5 years. But in that 5-year process, there should be some real rehabilitative process in that 5 years.
Right, and the legislators are driven by taxpayers. And taxpayers need to drive the legislators to legislation that can do something to remedy the situation.
Thank you, Grady, for being here. You have been watching Comcast Community Concerns, where we're always moving our community into the future. Have a blessed day.